Hello everyone. Welcome to Novel Story in English. I will present the story of a love story, forced marriage. My name is Anggia Tiffani. I'm an obstetrician. Being a doctor was my dream from a young age. The reason is that I really like children and I also want to be one of the people who can help others. I wasn't born into a wealthy family or a respected person who had a lot of wealth. My mother was named Intan, and my father was Bian. My mother worked as a maid, and my father became a gardener in the family home of Mr. Pasha Wiratma. The family is respected and is very respected by many people. He is not only rich in wealth but also rich in heart. I was so close to Mr. Pasha Wiratma that he thought of me as his daughter. He did not have a daughter, and he wanted a daughter very much. I'm so grateful to him for helping me get to wear my proud white suit. And thanks to him, I was able to achieve my current goals. But once upon a time, my father had a pretty severe illness and had to do a heart transplant. I was a doctor. I knew little by little about my father's illness. Even though I'm not a cardiologist, I was confused and sad because my father had to have surgery immediately. But it was all hampered by the considerable cost that I had to get as quickly as possible. Until Mr. Pasha offered himself to be the guarantor of Dad's operating expenses until he recovered. I was happy, but who would have thought that behind the offer, she applied for the terms of marriage with her only son. I know what Mr. Pasha's only son looks like. I'm sometimes disgusted to see it, not that I'm arrogant, but I don't like men who like to switch partners from teenage women to mature women. But what else am I just done with my education and I also just worked 2 months ago at a well-known hospital in this city. My savings are not much and it is much less if I use it for my father's treatment, which amounts to hundreds of millions of rupiah in addition to the cost of treatment and medicine that must be redeemed. I don't think about myself anymore. Without me thinking long, I would have made Mr. Pasha's offer in the hope that his son could accept me as a wife. After all, Mr. Pasha has helped me a lot, and I want to return his kindness to me, and maybe this is the way it is. I married the only son of a wealthy businessman named Bian Wiratma after my dad finished the surgery. And for the past year I've been living in a hollow household. Not for a gentle speech, not even a smile he never gave me. We did live on one roof, but we didn't sleep in one bed. People out there might think I'm happily married to the only child of a great businessman. But they don't know what my household looks like. I am indeed a wife, and I still have a husband who would have thought that I was still a holy woman who was never touched by my own husband. Honestly, as a normal, mature woman, I also craved warm caresses from my husband. Yes, I want to feel like a woman who can make my husband happy. What's more, if I could give my husband a child, it was my dream. But dreams seem to be just dreams. For a year, I was married, he never touched me. I've been trying to be the best. And I've always watched from him waking up to going to bed again just to get one to thank you from his lips that might make him accept me. But it turns out that it's not the thank you I receive, but the insults even sometimes that I get suffering. I didn't give up until there I kept trying to be an acceptable woman to be his wife. Until one day, I accidentally wore very sexy lingerie. I was really disgusted to see how I looked, but I felt like wasting it because I wanted to melt my husband's heart, and I knew it wasn't a sin. It's a pity that what I get is not what I want. What I get are insults and vile words, and I even called a whore. How do I feel about being called by my husband? Sick. I smiled bitterly in tears that I had held back. Tears came out without permission. I wanted to be strong, but I was too fragile until only tears were able to comfort the sadness. We initially stayed at Mr. Pasha's house, but because Bian wanted us to stay in his apartment, Mr. Pasha allowed it. It's not without reason that Brian wants to live in an apartment. All he does because he wants to be free of his parents. So that Mr. Pasha did not know that he had not changed at all and he was free to bring his woman into this apartment. Sometimes he carries not one woman but two. He took her into the room. Almost every night, I hear the sighs of women that make my heart hurt. I can only squeeze my shirt. I didn't dare say it to my mum and dad because I was so scared they were worried about me. And I didn't dare say that to my father-in-law either. Because from the beginning, he married me to his son, he wanted Brian to be a better human being. And if my mother-in-law doesn't like me at all, and even she's very opposed to me being Brian's wife, she thinks, it's all because I'm a maid's son doesn't deserve to be with the businessman's son. It proved to be my wedding, and Brian had just no reception at all. Not even the people closest to me know that I'm married. And for the past year, I've kind of started giving up on my husband. He never seemed to be able to accept me, and I didn't care about him anymore. I'm constantly humiliated for getting used to it and no longer expecting that he can accept me. Now that I have surrendered to the state of all I have conquered and let it flow in its own way, I just hope and pray to the Creator someday, He will give me happiness. And all the suffering I feel right now will all be paid off soon. Morning, Sir, greeting Anggia kindly to her husband, who had just come out of the room. Morning, replied the woman who came out behind Brian in the sexy lingerie he was wearing. Anggia stares at her husband and boyfriend out of the room as she hugs Brian's arm with his spoiled. In addition, Anggia can see many kiss marks are on the woman's neck. Anggia ducked down the water and fell on the dinner table. He always prepares food for Brian and his girlfriend before he leaves for work. Honey, what are you going to eat for breakfast? Asked Sila in her spoiled voice after Brian sat down. Fried rice Samayang, replied Brian with his sweet smile. Yes, for a moment yes, replied Sila. Anggia makes my coffee too, said Sila. Yes Sila, replied Anggia, who began to step tight and left Brian and Sila, who were eating breakfast that he made not long ago. Anggia was done making a cup of coffee for Sila. Anggia puts it on the dinner table, and Sila starts picking up the cup containing the coffee, and he starts sipping it. Buer. Sila spouted the coffee right on Anggia's face. Anggia rubbed his face. He was confused as to why Sila did that to him. Not to mention Anggia asked Sila to pour the hot coffee on Anggia and throw the glass on the floor. Krong. The sound of broken glass was thrown by Sila deliberately. The room was already very messy, and black coffee had soiled the floor that had been clean. You made coffee this bitter, snapped Sila. Sorry, Sila, replied Anggia with a tremble and held the pain and heat in his body due to exposure to hot coffee water that was deliberately flushed by Sila. Clean up, said Sila. Ah yes, but I treat my wounds first, said Anggia. Clean this first, snapped Sila again. Brian just kept quiet, and he didn't care. Sila treated Anggia like an animal. He only focused on his breakfast. Anggia sat crouched, and he began to pick up the pieces of glass that were scattered on the floor. He looked at Brian but not the other way around. Anggia really hopes that Brian will repay him, but it seems very unlikely. Ah, Anggia moaned, and she saw her index finger was bleeding, and she sucked it fast. So don't fantasize, said Sila, who was sitting with Brian at the dining table chair. Anggia continued to clean up the glass shards, and she began to mop the floor. But when he started to finish doing it all, Sila accidentally bumped the glass containing his milk. Right at Anggia, who was below him. Krang. Bueg. Tep tep tep. The spilled milk fell right on Anggia's head, and the drops of milk wet Anggia's hair. Anggia got up. She stood up trying to clean her body. Oops, Sila said as he covered his mouth with his hand. You don't care at all, said Anggia in a sad voice, and tears fell again because Sila's actions made Anggia suffer. Sila had done that to him many times, but never once did Bian see or defend him. Sorry, Sila said lightly. Honey, let's go to the room, said Bian, pulling Sila's hand. Come on, said Sila. Anggia, who lived there, started to clean the dirty dining table and floor. After that, he started to clean himself to the bathroom. Soon he was finished, and his clothes were clean. Anggia started to treat her wound, which felt sore. She was going to ask permission not to come to work for today. Anggia sat on the sofa opposite Bian's room. Honey, Sila sighed. Suck baby, Bian said. Said Sila's voice. Honey, Sila started playing on top of Bian. More dear, Bian said in his husky voice. That voice is what Anggia hears every day. Anggia was crying again. Her husband never appreciated her at all, not even a little bit, until when she would live in a state of money that left her physically and mentally. You're so damned, sir, Anggia muttered as she rubbed the trail of tears on her cheeks. Anggia continued to clean his wound and also added that he had to give medicine, and he started to hear someone knocking on the apartment door. Anggia stood. He walked towards the door, and he opened it, and it was his mother-in-law who came. Mother, said Anggia, intending to kiss the back of her mother-in-law's hand, but Cindy quickly brushed it off. Get out of the way, Cindy nudged Anggia, who was standing in front of him. Mother, Sila said as he came out of the room. Previously, Cindy had said that she would come to Bian's apartment because she knew Sila was there. Sila is a sexy and highly paid model, and Sila is very proud that Bian can date Sila. What's more, if Bian married Sila, it would make him even happier. Honey, said Cindy, and the two hugged each other. I'm just getting more beautiful, said Sila as he put his hands on Cindy's shoulders, and his eyes looked at Sila from top to bottom. You can do it, said Cindy with a happy smile that never faded on her lips. When I met Sila. What are you doing there? Sila snapped. Because Anggia just stood frozen in place watching the two women who were hugging warmly. Ah yes, said Anggia, who walked away. Making mother drink stupid, Sila snapped again. Remember that if it weren't for my husband, your sick father couldn't operate. And if it weren't for my husband's kindness, you wouldn't be a doctor, remember that, said Cindy, looking down on Anggia. Yes, ma'am, answered Anggia. Hurry up, Sila said again. Let's sit down, ma'am. The two of them started to sit on the sofa and talked about the latest expensive items. I've got the new bag, Mrs., said Sila proudly. Even though the bag, which is worth hundreds of millions, he got from Bian himself. Oh yes, asked Cindy in disbelief, looking at Sila, the son-in-law of his dreams. According to him, Sila is very worthy to be side by side with Bian's son. What's more, if he brought Sila to meet his friends, he was sure they would all feel jealous. Yes ma'am, replied Sila. Then Anggia came with a napkin containing 2 cups of tea and started to put them on the table. After that, he left without speaking, leaving the two women. He entered his room and closed the door. She sat on the bed hugging her knees, and she started to cry. Hicks hicks hicks. Anggia's cry sounded so pitiful and sad for a year. He had felt this sad. And he can always only cry about his situation. Thank you to all of you. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment,